Well, welcome into a special edition reaction podcast of the LSU Sports Insider. I'm Zach Ewing with our advocate LSU football beat writer, Wilson Alexander. And the last time we did one of these, Wilson, it was bad news. It was Bryce Underwood. Now we've got good news. Even if it was mostly expected, I think it's good to have confirmation. Garrett Nussmeier, QB1 for LSU this past season, has announced he is coming back to school for his final season of eligibility. And LSU's quarterback worries for the next season are solved.
That's right. Garrett Nussmeier had to make a decision here. It seemed like things were trending in this direction, as we talked about before, but it was something that after LSU's regular season finale against Oklahoma, when he was asked about it, Garrett said he still needed to have those conversations. He had sort of put them off to the end of the season, and those will be going on over sort of the past week or so. And now that they've finished those, he's reached a decision, and he's going to be bypassing the NFL for now and coming back for his final year of eligibility. And this is big for LSU because it needed some stability in an offense that's going to have a lot of change going on around him. You've got at least 3 offensive linemen who are gone. One of your main running backs, Josh Williams, is gone out of eligibility now. 2 of your top 3 receivers are gone. Your starting tight end is gone. So he's one of the only sort of a little bit of stability in an offense that's undergoing quite a bit of change. And that's important to have because it's at the most important position. LSU is still going to have to find a lot of pieces around him, but now you at least know who your quarterback is going to be. And for Garrett, if he's able to build off of year 1 and kind of make the year 2 leap that we've seen quarterbacks do in their second year as a starter, then he can not only, sort of hold up the rest of the offense around him, but also build on his own draft stock to going into next year and make him maybe a surefire first-round pick. That'll certainly be his goal.
Yeah, there were times this year where he was listed in mock drafts as a first rounder. And of course, those are way early. A lot of NFL teams haven't even done a lot of evaluation at that point, or you don't even know which teams will need a quarterback, all of that stuff. But I mean, I think this was legitimately a decision for him. Like you said, he had to go talk about a few things with his family and things like that. And we've heard, I mean, as recently as CJ Daniels, oh, hey, I'm coming back. And then a week later, he's in the transfer portal. So things can change. And I just think it's good to get that confirmation for LSU. We'll talk about what this means for them as a team and what they can do now in the transfer portal now that they know they have their quarterback. But let's talk a minute, Wilson, about Nuss and the season he just had. 63.7% completion, 3,739 yards. He had 26 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. I would characterize that as good numbers, maybe not great. And I know our Scott Rabelais has made the comparison before, as have others. Not to say that Nuss is going to come back and win the Heisman, but it's a little bit like the first year in Baton Rouge for both Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels, where it's like, he was good, but could he use that other year of seasoning and be that much more comfortable and kind of turn good into great?
Well, that's certainly the path that Garrett's going to try to follow now. And sometimes I think we sort of overdo that. I think that happened a lot with Jaden going into his second year, everybody directly comparing him to Burrow. Is he going to be able to make that year 2 leap? But the principle of that is at least the same here in that, Garrett Nussmeier had a first full year as a starting quarterback in college. And we saw some ups and downs. And now he does need to build on that season and to be able to develop throughout the offseason. And you are going to hope now, though, for a similar year 2 leap because, like you said, he did some really good things this year. I mean, he was in an offense that struggled to run the football consistently, so he didn't have a whole lot of help in that regard. LSU became incredibly one-dimensional. I mean, he's thrown the 3rd most pass attempts in the entire country this year and the 2nd most in LSU history going into the bowl game. And that's just a sign of how much he was being asked to throw the football. You end up as sometimes putting that in harm's way. And he made some bad decisions, especially in that sort of 6-quarter stretch between the second half of Texas A&M and the Alabama game, where he had, I think it was 5 interceptions and also a lost fumble. And, that directly led to, certainly contributed to those losses. There was a lot that happened in those games, but it contributed to those losses. And like you said, 11 interceptions on the season. He's got to be able to cut that down. And he talked about that after the Oklahoma game, how he's got to be able to cut down on the interceptions. There's also some other little things, like as a deep ball passer, he's got to be more consistent. Garrett, according to Pro Football Focus, let me grab this number real quick. He only completed 34.6% of his throws more than 20 yards downfield this year. That's something LSU was working with him on, and he's got to get better in that area. By comparison, Daniels completed 63.6% of those during his last year at LSU when he won the Heisman. That's a big jump, and that's something where we know Garrett has the arm talent, but he's got to be able to get on the same page with his receivers and just be a little bit more accurate downfield and also continue to work on his role in the run game. That's something he talked a lot about this year, putting LSU in the right play, depending on the looks that they're getting. He did a lot better job of that the last 2 games. And I think those are things that he can build on now going into his second year, because he's seen that and gotten that experience. He was going through a lot of this for the first time, even though he's been around LSU a lot. This was, his first year as a starter, and so now he's got to be able to build on that going into next year.
Yeah, he certainly had some moments. The comeback against Ole Miss, probably right at the top of the list, where it looked like he was going to become a star. But I did like those last 2 games because they were steady. He obviously left with an injury against Oklahoma and came back and maybe played his best 3 quarters, most consistent 3 quarters of the whole year. I don't know. So there's certainly something to build on there. I think Nussmeier will come in, depending on what happens in the portal, as one of the more heralded quarterbacks in the SEC. So LSU has a good starting point. As far as what that means, but before we dig into that, I do want to let you know that this reaction podcast is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. So what this means for LSU, I guess we can kind of do this in an inverse way, Wilson. Like, if they hadn't gotten Garrett Nussmeier to come back, what it would mean was that quarterback suddenly becomes priority 1A in the transfer portal. That's where you have to focus your efforts. That's where you have to focus your NIL budget, all of those sorts of things. Now they can pivot. And you mentioned at the top, some of these positions where they will pivot to are places that will really help Nuss: the offensive line, wide receivers, tight ends.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, LSU, we already know that they're targeting some tight ends. They're bringing in Arkansas transfer Luke Haas on a visit this week. They've got some other players who they've been looking at that position as well. Wide receiver, they've been linked to Barry and Brown out of Kentucky. They might take, though, certainly multiple, I think, receivers. Now that you had some guys like C.J. Daniels in particular go in, that was a little bit unexpected. And because there just isn't a lot of experience behind Aaron Anderson and Xavier Thomas, and there isn't a lot of guys who can stretch the field vertically, depending on what Chris Hilton does in that regard. But also guys who just have some height and length on the outside. LSU, I think Kylan Billiot is the only one who's really got some of that sort of length. He's about 6'3", and he's a freshman who didn't play this year. And so you're looking for some guys with some experience, with some ability to stretch defenses vertically, and some length on the outside to replace what LSU is losing, particularly with Kyron Lacey and C.J. Daniels, who provided that height. And now you need to kind of get the deep passing game going as well. And the offensive line is probably just as big, if not bigger, than those spots because of for 2 years now, LSU's had this same offensive line intact, unless somebody was injured here or there. And now you're going through a lot of transition. And most of the guys on the roster just aren't proven. We'll see what Emory Jones does. That would be obviously a boost for this team if he came back with the experience that he has, a guy who was just voted second team All-SEC. But other than that, you're looking at Paul Mabinga has 4 career starts. Tyree Adams has 1 start. And then obviously DJ Chester started this year. Nobody else has any starting experience. And really Mabinga and Adams, it's not like significant starting experience. There's only a few games under their belt. And so LSU is probably going to be looking for a couple offensive linemen. Don't really have names for that position yet. We'll see who else enters the portal. But yeah, there's a lot going on the offensive side of the ball that LSU needs to build around Garrett Nussmeier in order to help him and the rest of this team have success.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So as we go forward in this very busy offseason, as it seems like it always is in college football anymore, the next couple of things that you mentioned, Emory Jones' decision, I don't know when we'll hear that, but that's going to be the next big domino one way or the other to fall. And then LSU continues preparations for the Texas Bowl on New Year's Eve. So those are the next couple of things, Wilson. Any other things that you're looking at as we continue through December, or just kind of keeping an eye and a half on that transfer portal?
Yeah, just both eyes on the transfer portal. That's everything these days. I don't expect, obviously LSU's also got to fill the tight ends and special teams coordinator position. Based on Brian Kelly's history, what he's done the last few years, I don't know that that'll get done until after the bowl game. They'll probably use who they have on staff at the moment to kind of get through the bowl. But that'll be something else that they do have to do here in the offseason. Kelly, of course, will have to make evaluations of the full staff, decide if he wants to make any changes. But I think right now, all the focus is on the transfer portal, building this roster to be more competitive in 2025. LSU has lost a lot of what would be its junior class over the past few years. They've got to get some mature players in here, guys who can be difference makers right away. We've already talked about those positions on the offensive side. On defense, you're looking at safeties, cornerbacks, edge rushers as well, maybe even a defensive tackle. We'll see who kind of shows up in the transfer portal at that position. So there's a lot of spots on this roster that LSU's got to fill, and that certainly will be the focus here over the coming weeks.
Yeah, less than 9 months till that trip to Clemson. But at least now we know
2024 isn't even over, and that's already the focus. Is the season opener next year.
But listen, now we know who the starting quarterback will be, barring some injury or something. So it's obviously that's good news for LSU. Garrett Nussmeier back, and I don't know, Wilson. We'll just wrap up with I think again we expected this. It's a good day for LSU.
It is. There's been a lot of departures to the transfer portal. Most of them, as Brian Kelly said, I think everybody would agree you would expect. A couple that were unexpected, like with C.J. Daniels. But on the whole here, this is a piece of good news for LSU moving forward. This is a guy who you can build around now, who's has SEC experience, a ton of arm talent. Now you just got to get him better going into the offseason, continue to help him improve. Because there's a lot that he showed you in his first year as a starter that was really positive. And then, as we already talked about, there's some things that he's got to get better at, and so that's going to be the key over this offseason is becoming that really complete quarterback. You mentioned briefly kind of his spot in the SEC pecking order. There's some good quarterbacks coming back in the SEC next year. You talk about DJ Lagway, Lenora Sellers, Garrett Nussmeier is certainly in the argument for the top 3, maybe even top 5 in the league coming into next year. When you have a guy like that, you have something to build around, and so that's always a good thing.
Absolutely. We encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the like button for us, and keep it locked to theadvocate.com/LSU for all of Wilson's coverage. And here at the LSU Sports Insider, we'll have a couple of episodes for you just about every week. We might pare it down to one for the Christmas week if you'll let us do that. Other than that, we're coming at you twice a week. We've got football and, of course, basketball and gymnastics coming up as well here on the LSU Sports Insider. So for Wilson Alexander, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching.